All right, everyone, so picking up from where we came from previously, so you should have your research question already written. I'm going to walk through just some tips when you're writing a rationale now. Now, in your rationale, you need to identify the aim of the original experiment and why it led to the new idea for the new one. That's where you're looking at what possibly was wrong with the original experiment and why you made the changes that you did. Really briefly, then what I want to focus on today is the explaining the related subject matter. Now, there are a couple of ways that you could go about this, but one suggestion that I have is for you to possibly use a grid like this. Now, this is called an inquiry grid. An inquiry grid is there to sort of try and focus what you're wanting to talk about because you have a really limited word count that you are able to work with for this assignment. So therefore you need to be concise and you need to be on topic. So with your inquiry grid down the side here, I've got the 3 sources. You don't need to specifically have 3, but the more sources that you have on a topic, the more accurate the information and the interpretation of the topic you might be. Then up the top, I've just put these 4 different focus points or questions that I want to talk about in mine. You could have more, you could have less. I wouldn't suggest that you have too much more. So you can see the first one, linking photosynthesis to plant growth. I'm wanting to know, how do they link together? What is photosynthesis? Some limiting factors of plant growth and limiting factors of photosynthesis. Now, this is a grid, so the idea would be that for each of these, you get about 3 or so sources. Then you put dot points or notes in that grid, so then when you go to write your report, you are just looking at these dot points. You are not looking at the actual articles, you are just looking at those dot points. So this enables you to be able to really be sure that you're not plagiarizing, essentially. Now, use this if you'd like to. This is a good way to try and make sure that you're getting a really broad scope and you're making sure you're covering everything that you need to. So questions up the top or topics at the top, and then you put your dot points down in your sources. And then when you write your rationale, you go back to here and you look at them. Okay, so now you can see over this side of the screen, I have a journal article that I've found. Now, I've got my title here. This is the author. This is when it was last revised, so that's the date I'd use in my reference. And then I can see up here, that is, oh, sorry, this one here. This is the journal article name. Oh. Then we've got the volume, and sorry, these are the pages, okay? And then that's the date it was published. So that's what I would use for my reference material. Now, I always suggest that you write your reference first. If you were using one of these, you could possibly write your reference underneath, and that way you definitely have the references all in one spot. So I'd look over here. Now, I want you to look at this journal article. This here is called an abstract. An abstract's usually in a different font or in italics or smaller, but it's separated. And the abstract gives it a summary of the journal article. So if you were wanting to see if you can use a journal article, then you would look straight at the abstract and see if it had anything that was of use to you. If it doesn't, then you'd move on and find something else. Underneath it, this one has it labeled called the introduction. Some of them don't. So if I look at this one here, this is a different journal article. This one, this is the abstract here, and then it goes into the introduction down here. Now, when I look at these papers, I'm wanting to see, I have to have a quick scan to see if it talks about any of these topics that I'm looking at. If it does, then I'm going to take notes, and if it doesn't, then I'm going to move on, okay? Now I'm going to have a really quick look here. This is talking about what photosynthesis is, and it's talking about photosynthesis, use carbon dioxide and oxygen from plant tissues, and I'm reading. Okay, Okay, so I've swapped over because the last one didn't have any of the topic that I was looking for, and that's fine. So over here we've got photosynthesis, and it's talking about what photosynthesis is, okay? So then what I would do is, maybe I've put my source over here, I could in-text reference him, so that's Evans, 2000, and I think it's 13. Yep, 2013, so I saw that from down here. And right now I'm thinking that photosynthesis, what is it? I could say, and I'm going to look at this, and the best way to do it is you look at it and then you look away. So photosynthesis is the process plants use to capture energy from sunlight and convert it to biochemical energy, which is used to support all life on Earth. So then I'll look away and I'll type what I can remember or bits of that. So requires sunlight or energy from sunlight to convert to biochemical energy. Okay, and then I can look back and see what else I could talk about in here. So that's our inquiry grid. That's one way that you can take down notes and then write your rationale from there. So that's another thing. Now, what I want to go through now is using Google Scholar. So I could write in here, you go onto Google and then you type in Google Scholar. Google Scholar gives you peer-reviewed articles that it can look at. So they're scientific articles. Sometimes they're really wordy, but maybe you might be able to find something in the abstract that really simply puts what you're looking for. So I could put limiting factors of photosynthesis. There we go. Search. So it gives you books. This is widely online. So if I click on that, if it says a PDF, that'll download a PDF for you to read. Loading. Okay, and so here I can go through and possibly see bits and pieces. Usually it won't give you the whole thing, but sometimes it gives you bits and pieces that you can have a read through and make sure that you reference everything. Okay, so then we go back and then you can keep going. Have a look. If I click on this one, then it will download that PDF. Okay, and then your other option, which you should be really familiar with, is just using Google. Okay, now I want to point out that things like bbc.co.uk, that's good for you to get an understanding, but that's not a really reputable reference. So if I keep scrolling down, then I find things like these PDFs from this education place that I've looked at before. This is written by a book. And then we've got this one here. This is also written, but this is old, 1938, so it could be outdated information. And then we've got another thing that looks like it's either a book or an article. So those are the sort of things that you want to be clicking on to see if it is useful for you for your information. And always relate back to your inquiry grid. What am I actually looking for? How am I going to take down the notes? Make sure that you're not directly writing in your rationale looking at a website. The last thing that I want to point out to you guys is if you go into Google and search academic phrasebooks, that looks like this. I searched academic phrasebook PDF, and this was, I think, one of the first ones. This just gives you some sentence starters to look at. So this is introductions. It's not specifically for a science experiment, but it does help you. So it gives you a topic, establishing the importance. What's the importance? And it gives you some sentence starters so that you're not continually writing the exact same way. So it's got heaps of different sections that you can have a breeze through. So if you're getting stuck and you're not sure how to start a sentence, have a look on this. This might help you get the ball rolling. Alternatively, there's this online one, which is called Academic Phrase Bank, and you can go on here and it has heaps of different topics. It has things like writing a hypothesis, study design. So this would be used in your methods, right? Materials and methods, section intro and scope, things like that. So it gives you heaps and heaps of things that you could talk about, okay? And they're all just sentence starters that they're not all going to apply. And if it's using language that you don't understand or you can't explain yourself, don't use it. I don't want to be reading something that looks basically like it was completely written here, and then if I ask you to explain what that means, you can't explain it. So make sure if you're using the sentence starter, if you're using that language, you know what it means. Same for the rationale. You shouldn't be using language that you can't explain yourself. All right, so hopefully that gives you something to work on. Remember, you've got the questions as far as your report format, so this should be done or getting done very soon. And then you have the rest of it. Make sure that you're referring to your Harvard referencing for each section or each different resource you're using, and make sure that there's in-text referencing all the way through. All right, thanks guys.